Welcome to the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, where we have uncensored conversations, we exchange information, and we have tons of resources for all the viewers and the listeners. I'm your host, the Fire Medic CEO, LP. We're doing this series called Sibling Bonds. This is going to be episode 2. We have Albert Grieve, we have Claire, and we have Ashley in the building back again. We're going to have some great content and some great conversations. Let me get all the disclaimers out. So if you are triggered at any point during this podcast and you need help, immediately call 911. That's going to get you all the immediate resources that you need. If you don't have an immediate need, we have some other resources listed in the show notes for everyone. If you have any suicidal issues or know of any suicidal situations in the United States, call 988. The number is available toll free 24/7. If you are listening and or watching this podcast from across the pond or anywhere in the world, because this is a worldwide podcast, we're streaming on all major platforms. You can watch it on Spotify as well as our YouTube channel, which is Penson Pending Consulting Solutions LLC. If you need help in the UK, you can call 999. That's their version of 911. If you're in another country like Switzerland, you can call 112 or 143 for any immediate help. This is episode 2 of Sibling Bonds. Today's episode is going to be entitled The Presentation. That's very intentional. I'm going to pass the mic over to Albert. The mic is yours, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate you again, LP. I appreciate everyone for being here. It's kind of a continuation from our conversation last week where LP kind of outlined like what the typical role is of a big brother and how I felt I wasn't able to meet up those standards. The presentation refers to the fact that to a certain extent, I've always talked about my background, be it through scholarship applications or actual presentations like older youth summits or for law enforcement or in my various forms of work. So I've actually been on my healing journey to a certain extent because I've been releasing some of the toxicity. But I got to a point where I was talking about things that I hadn't even talked about with my siblings, and that includes Claire. And I often start my presentations by sharing that I'm not proud of some of the things that I did, some of the things that I chose to do for purposes of survival. I feel like I threw my sisters and my mom at times under the bus. I still carry guilt for the death of my mom because I felt like I could have done something to prevent it. And although the guilt has less of an impact today than it has in the past, the guilt is still the same size. But one of the things that I talked about had to do with Claire, something I did to Claire as a child. And I did it to protect myself. I didn't do it to protect my sibling. And then I talk about this concept of blind obedience. When people are in child abuse situations and domestic violence situations, they sometimes have to make difficult decisions and they may choose self-preservation. And because of that, even when they're removed from the environment, they still carry guilt and it's still very difficult. There was this time when I asked by my father, it was one of the drunken episodes, things were chaotic. I think we're cooking burritos or pizza or something. I don't know. I think it was burritos, yeah. And Claire's in the studio today. So it makes it hard because now I'm saying it again. And at least if she was virtual, there'd be a little bit of separation. But she's literally right next to me. So hi. We talk about it, but it's still difficult. Even like sharing the story of sharing it's difficult. But Claire resides in the same city as me, and she wants to come and see one of my presentations. And so now I'm going to be standing on stage talking about this, and I hadn't even talked to her about it. But there's a situation where my father, we're making burritos, and he was very angry, and he handed me, as a child, a hammer, and he told me to hit Claire. And as a child, I complied. And I talk about this to show that, like, there are difficult decisions. My mom made very difficult decisions, harmful decisions, but if you were to put yourself in her shoes and kind of understand, for my mom, it was the choice of running away to where she'd probably get institutionalized, and they keep playing around with her meds until she recanted and said everything was in her head, and then she'd go right back into the same environment. And I grew up seeing this type of stuff where the authorities were not helping. And it still is like not an excuse. So here we are. I was, 36 maybe at the time, and I had to have a conversation with Claire a couple days before I'm supposed to be on stage, still trying to get comfortable standing in an auditorium speaking to an audience about my background. And now I have to have a conversation with her that says, I talk about the situation I never even talked about with you, that I hit you multiple times in the back with the hammer because my father told me to do so. And this is what I'm going to talk about on stage, but now I have to talk to you about it, and I feel horrible about it. I wish I could take it back. I can't. Nothing I say is going to change the past, but I don't want to be standing on stage and talking about it to you for the first time. So we had to have a conversation like a couple days before this presentation about the situation. And I also have to add, it wasn't just that, because that alone is probably enough, but my father was like OCD perfectionism, and so everything we had to do to the best of our ability. So when he handed me the hammer, I actually turned it to the claw side, and I struck my sister several times, like as much as I could, like my strength and everything, in the back with a claw hammer. And so then you wonder why kids eventually come in care and siblings are separated, why it's difficult to maintain that relationship and maintain that bond. Because for a long time, both of my sisters, I've gone years without talking to both of my sisters at times because it's just difficult, just being apart from one another. But then when we do talk to one another, we're thinking about our backgrounds and stuff. So that's the topic today, continuing on the conversation about me failing to live up to my standards because I was a victim of domestic violence and child abuse. failing to live up to the standards of what a big brother should be. But we didn't have this normal life, and how it impacts us in our communication moving forward. So that is what the presentation is about. But with that, I'm going to turn it to Claire. And
well, first off, I want to just explain that when you recalled that story, it's a crazy thing that the mind does in trying to protect us and shield us from negative memories. And this aspect tends to be very strong in my mind personally, because I'll see things or remember things in the most positive light, and people will be like, well, did you even know that this happened or that happened or that person did that or whatever? And I'm like, oh, well, whatever. It's not that I don't always remember, but sometimes I remember things differently. So that situation with the hammer, I just remembered it as my stepdad holding it. So when I heard him say that he was the one holding it, like, I still can't even remember that really. Like, I can understand because we were all put in situations like that. Strange. Kind of just brings me kind of to the point to where when I was at my very last straw and I was ready to choke our, their father to death. He was turning purple and everything, and stopped me. And I didn't want to stop. I was a little bitter. I was honestly a little bit bitter at that point for a little while. But I don't know if everyone remembers that till of that moment. I don't know if I've even shared that, but like, just that was a real feeling at that moment, just because we had all been through so much, and I just really wanted to put it into all of that, no matter what I had to deal with at the end of the day. So yeah, it's crazy how mind works, how feelings work, because I don't remember that situation as Albert holding him at all.
I knew that if I failed to comply, that I would get hit or something like that. So, and I don't know, Ashley, if you were aware of this situation or you recall something like this, or what your thoughts are about what Clara shared. But I think it's important to be able to push through the pain and try to talk about some of these things and build a relationship, because we are more than our past experiences. Because I don't know, like the context Claire and I just talked about, that was a lot. Like, I didn't know that she was upset at Ashley before stopping her from trying to kill her father. I mean, that's,
wait, what?
You missed that.
Wait,
Yeah, I know what I'm talking about is difficult. I don't know if you knew that about me, LP, did you? Does it change how you view me?
No, because when I look at like ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, there is nothing that you are telling me that makes me think, I blame you for you not being the adults. The adults are the ones that are running the show. They're telling you what to do, whether it was, hey, go sweep the floor, go brush your teeth, go hit somebody in the head with a hammer. You're following directions, even though it's under duress, or even if it's something that you don't like to do. When adults are not doing moral and ethical stuff, or they're telling their kids to do immoral and unethical stuff, that's on the adult. That's not on the kid. If you got an adult that's not doing the proper things that adults should be doing, like keeping you safe, loving you, providing for you, sheltering you, I don't blame the child for that. I don't blame children for bad behaviors that they're being forced to do under duress, because this is not something that you were like, yeah, oh, Joy, I can't wait to bash my sister in the head or whatever. You're not getting pleasure and excitement about that. You're not sitting there like saying, hey, if I could do something about it, I would definitely do the worst thing that I can do. I've been in situations when I was younger, my mom dated this guy, and he did an act of domestic violence where he tried to kill my aunt. And she, to this day, she has these little bitty slash marks on her forearm because she was blocking him as he was trying to slice her with this butcher knife. I'm 11 years old, probably 100 pounds soaking wet, maybe. The guy's like 220 sock, probably like 6'2". I can't do nothing against him. In my wildest dream, I couldn't do nothing. I had, for years, had to deal with the fact that I used to be like, man, if I ever see this guy on the street somewhere as an adult, he's going to be hurt. And I remember talking to my mom about that some years ago, because I did run into him as an adult, and I didn't touch him. And I had such restraint, and I'm telling you, it was because I knew if I put hands on this dude, he was going to be either dying or dead. And I didn't want my mom to be visiting me in jail. And I knew that she would not have approved of what I had done, because after that incident, she left him alone. We never saw him again in our home. It wouldn't have changed the situation. So I don't blame kids when they are told to do things by adults that are negative. Whether, like I said, whether stealing something or committing some other crime. I don't blame you at all. That's not your fault. That's not your, I know it's a burden that you bear. You did something under duress. So there is nothing that I can even, nothing in my DNA says, yeah, man, you were so wrong for complying.
One of my presentations I did at Lincoln University for a conference is I talk about this concept of blind obedience. I talk about the fact that I had to do things as a child that I would not do in a normal circumstance because I was forced to. And people don't understand the force. Well, My choice is to be brutally beaten, killed, maimed, some other thing, or do what I was told to do. But that included causing harm to others. So you're like quite literally being taught how to be abusive. 100%, there's no way around it. In absent some sort of intervention, I take those learned lessons and do it as an adult, right? So that's one of the reasons why I do my presentations and stuff, because I totally could have been down on a different path. But I was talking about, I mean, that's like the most difficult, one of that and not saving my mom. Are like one of the most difficult things that happened in my childhood. And so like I had to talk to Claire because Claire was saying she was going to come to this presentation and watch. And I quite literally described how one of you guys will, because I've blocked it out and I've not been able to access those memories. And so Claire doesn't remember it with as vivid detail as me. I think I did. Like as I talked about it, I recorded it because I used part of it. And she talks about how mom had, well, we'll talk about that in a second. You can bring up how mom presented you to my father. Yeah. So she talked about that. But anyway, so Claire basically says she didn't think it was my fault. But then during this live interview, that she looks back at one of the situations where she was actually choking him out, and apparently you stopped her from choking out Doug. I don't know what to call him. She was a little resentful of you for stopping. He was turning blue. She was succeeding in her goal of committing homicide, and you stopped her. Which, in looking back, it's probably a good thing because she would have been incarcerated, and who knows what path we would have went down on. So I don't know, Ashley, if you have an opinion or what your insight are, or even if you knew some of those things that Claire and I just talked about.
Well, the hammer thing, today's the first time I'm hearing about that. I didn't know about that. I know that the time where he took a hammer and busted mom's head wide open and kind of got a slap on the wrist about it because nobody really understood what happened, and she just went to the mental institution over that. But I think as far as when she was, I don't remember him turning blue. I don't remember I guess it brings back that, yeah, she must have been choking him. I really didn't remember that. But I do know, I feel like that was around the time where I found you in the closet trying to kill yourself, Claire?
Yeah.
Was that around that time frame?
Absolutely. The same exact day you stalked me instead of, I was just like, well, shoot, if I can't get him out, I was like, well, I'm done with the whole situation. So
okay, I know that some years ago you thought I called the police because for his safety, but I was calling the police for your safety. I know that part of it.
I was fine, and of course I wasn't fine, but in my mind I had a plan to save us all. But
yeah.
So continuing from last week's conversation about our roles and like what we've done, none of us would be where we're at today, most likely, had that not transpired. If Claire didn't try to kill Doug and then try to kill herself. Because there was that 911 hang up when she was committing suicide that got the authorities to finally take attention. And so if that had not happened, like things were getting really bad for me, like, and you guys as well, but like for me in a way where I wasn't really, there's no point. It was not worth living anymore. There's really no point. There was nothing good in life that could justify everything that was going on. It was done. It was like this life, failed attempt, hit, escape. I mean, just not. So like, regardless of what has happened in our adult life, like, I will always remember and be grateful for you trying to kill our father and kill yourself, because that is what finally got the authorities' attention.
Yeah, because I think it was only a matter of a few weeks that everything started hitting him.
And then it still took time because I took you first, but then Ashley and we still stayed there for a little while until you made your disclosures of the sexual abuse. And even with that, and I have the records. So you mentioned the hammer incident, Ashley. I have all the records, and maybe that's an episode itself of what the investigation was and why when Doug hit my mom in the head with a hammer, why she was institutionalized and seen as delusional, why the DA decided that wasn't domestic violence, while Child Protective Services determined that it was better for us to stay at home. I have all that documentation. That's part of what I use for training. So I think that's a whole other episode. We would not be where we're at without that horribly violent event. That event saved us.
Even getting out of home and being in a different environment, like even after a few hours of being in the mental hospital, I was like, okay, yeah, I guess I don't really belong here, but we don't belong in the home that we're in. So I need to combat this situation in a completely different way. Here's these authorities. It was just a matter of time when I just shared everything. It was just like, even if we're in different places, then it'll be better than what we're going through because our mom is gone. It's either one of us. I felt like it was either one of us. And I felt I was even afraid of being in the mental hospital away from you guys, because I was always trying to do things to like prevent as much harm from you guys, even though I wasn't as successful as I wanted to be. But I just felt like while I'm away, it's probably one of you guys either being molested or something happening. So I just wanted to get us out of that environment no matter what had to happen.
And we see that's the issue, because it's great to have these type of conversations, because it's not our fault that these things happen, and it shouldn't prevent us from having the best possible relationship. So I appreciate hearing that. It's still, and I hear it, but it still doesn't like soak in.
It's hard, yeah.
I mean, and I'm still on my healing journey. And, you know, it kind of makes me think, like, this process, there's no therapist that's on, and we may have future episodes where we have Leah Abraham or someone join us. Leah was willing to do it. But this is a form of therapy. It's therapeutic because we're talking about it. And it probably just takes time. And it helps every time I hear that. It sets in a little more. When it comes to the death of my mom, it wasn't until, as a law school student clerking for a magistrate judge, having this conversation with someone very intelligent in the law, as John Bodenhausen, having a conversation with him about my story, for him to utter the words to me that it was under duress, I was coerced, I was a child, it's not my fault. But, you know, I'm almost 30 years old before I finally got comfortable talking about all the details of what happened surrounding my mom's death. And we could probably talk about that a whole other episode, because that probably is going to take some time to get ready for. I mean, that's part of the reason that we don't speak up. That's one of the reasons we stay silent. And that silence is something that allows these types of situations to continue to occur. So I appreciate you saying that, LP. But for me personally, it's still something that I struggle with. And I don't know, Claire, Ashley, if you have thoughts about that specifically, the things that we did potentially as a child for survival that we regret.
Even the fact that Claire started choking him, the human mindset is all about survival. And typically, you will do whatever you need to do to survive. Even if it's doing something that is really bad, but you did, that was not the correct thing to do, because you're a minor, you're a kid, you're doing it under duress, and you still suffer. So you would have suffered whether you did it or not, because you were still that's still you know, the abuse that he did to you verbally as well as physically, and the abuse that he did to you, making you do abusive acts to other people. It's all under the same umbrella.
So that's interesting too. So not the correct thing. So as a child, not being taught what the correct thing to do is, seeing authorities come and leave us, apparently condoning what's going on, how on earth do you know what the correct thing is? Like literally, quite literally, we witnessed a homicide. And we went to school the next day. It's in the records for Ashley. And Ashley went to school and was like really reserved and kind of crying, all, you know, kind of weird all day. And then the teacher found her outside just bawling her tears out. And the principal asked what's going on. And then Ashley disclosed to the principal that our mom just died. Because, you know, the fire department carried my mom out, hog-tied position, rigor mortis, the whole nine. And then we went to school next Monday. And it was several months, almost 4 months before the whole suicide episode happened. So during that window, things were getting worse and worse. So what is the correct thing if you have someone that can kill someone and it's just fine, and this is a problem that no one else is helping with? And so then she tries to resolve the issue, and then the result is to put her in a mental institution. Because that was the result for Claire. They put her in a mental institution. But, like, how do you deal with this if there's nothing in our system or society that will help? If everyone just looks away?
It was over 4 months.
But actually, what do you think about this conversation? I really want to hear your perspective, because that's part of it is like us.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about this.
So for me, it wasn't the fire department for me. It was literally my friend's dad. So it was that found mom. That made it more awkward. There's nothing could be less awkward. I really remember 6th grade. I just remember crying in the cafeteria. I don't remember like doing any schoolwork or anything after that. Maybe I did, but I just kind of checked out.
If you're comfortable talking about it, is there anything that you look back and say, I wish I should have did, then I didn't?
So the biggest thing to me was mom, you know? Like, we all probably had what we should have done in that situation. I mean, because she was, sitting with a bag over her head for 12 plus hours? You know?
A pillowcase?
I remember a black trash bag.
That's not something I remember.
Okay. That's how I remember it.
It's interesting you say that too, because I'm not saying that is right or wrong. We all have our truths. And I will say the brain is really, really amazing about
It's interesting.
filling in gaps. No, like a psychological perspective. First I did is look to Claire, like, do you remember that way? And she didn't remember. And we're all different ages and we perceive it the same way. The ultimate result was the same, but how our brain recalls it is very interesting.
But that's why I don't like the sound of plastic. I can't stand Tweety Bird because you know what happened with Claire in that shirt she was wearing.
Don't remember the clothes we're wearing.
I hate Tweety Bird at this point because
What happened?
What was it doing with Tweety Bird?
So I think it was our dad that told us to take a belt or something, and she was wearing a Tweety Bird shirt
To take turns what?
and beating her.
Beating your mom.
But done.
So I think I said it earlier in the conversation. It's interesting how we all remember different bits and pieces. So again, there's one of the boundaries. Like, I'm not going to correct anyone's account of anything because we all recall it different ways. Ultimately, the result was the same. But like your perspective is one I'm not familiar with, and I don't remember what clothes are. But there are all different vivid images that we have. most vivid, and again, maybe we could just talk about this in a different case, the way in which he was carried out. That's one that I, as a child, learning what rigor mortis is. And Ashley, what is your first medical term that you're familiar with as a child? You put it in your book, I believe, or your poem.
Hurts too. Asphyxiation.
So rigor mortis, asphyxiation, these are things as a child that we're learning. I actually thought about writing a list of terminology that I could use to describe my childhood, such as homicide and incest and cruel and unusual. The fact that for us, oftentimes we have to give a disclaimer before we share our childhood. And probably for us, mom is number one as far as what we could or should have done. But if we search, there's probably a whole lot more. And it's not until we start pulling back those layers that we realize that we're really blaming ourselves for a lot more than we even realize. And to a certain extent, it's probably holding us back some. It's preventing us from communicating with each other and those types of things. So I think that's an important reason why we have to have these types of conversations. And hopefully other people can benefit from us doing this, because knowing that it's not our fault what happened. And I don't blame you guys for anything that happened. In fact, I mean,
I don't know.
Programming
was extremely strong, and I've studied a lot about programming, and so that takes a lot of blame off of you guys for just any behaviors that we all even display today, because we grew up in such a dysfunctional environment. And that's why I look at people differently as well, because I know we're not the only ones who've gone through horrific situations. And so, we are a culmination of our experiences and our perspectives and how we dealt with those situations. My experience also translates to other people as well. And of course, you guys are first and foremost. So
tying it back to last week's episode, I think you made some sort of comment about what you view yourself as your role with as being the oldest person. So I will speak for myself is that you fulfilled all your lifetime obligations with that one single act that got us out of the environment. So if you have any guilt or remorse or anything toward anything that happened in our childhood, I don't see it the same way. I mean, I will always love and appreciate you for saving us. I would not be where I'm at today if I had remained in that environment. So at least for me, I'm saying to both of you guys that I have no ill will or anything toward anything that happened in our childhood. Now, I don't view myself to that same standard, to that same lens, and that's something I'm working on. But at least I want to verbalize.
I think for me, when I think about your story, I think here are these three children who love their parents, who are in a horrible situation where you have one person who's being a narcissist, who's being totally abusive to the whole family, not just the kids, everybody in the household. And it's a no-win situation. Plus you have the other adults that don't live in the house, the first responders, the mandated reporters, like Albert and I are, who are not doing their job correctly. I did an interview with a woman last year. Her son has been missing since 2003. He was a special needs kid. 19 years later, they finally had enough evidence to prosecute this guy. His case was on court TV. It's Missouri versus Ferguson. And I remember watching the trial and looking at all the prosecution witnesses who were mandated reporters from the state, the home health nurses. I know they had a lot of the mandated reporters that would do in-home services. They had direct knowledge and contact with the dad and the son and his brother, as well as the mom. And it was like so many people, all these things, and didn't hotline it, as we call it, didn't call it in, didn't report it. And it's like that kid may still be alive to this day if people hadn't dropped the ball. I know years later, I believe because of that case, that at least as far as I'm concerned, the state of Missouri really start cracking down on us that are licensed and mandated reporters. You can't, like I talked to Albert before, if you're a mandated reporter, you're a mandated reporter 24/7. You can't see something like, oh, I'll report that when I go into work, when I clock in doing my 9 to 5. No, you have to report stuff, even if nothing comes of it, even if it's just an investigation and they say, oh, there's nothing to see here. You have to report that stuff. And to not do so has caused all kind of harm. You guys have experienced it. You're still dealing with the fallout, the PTSD from people not doing their jobs properly. You should have taken all of the things that have happened, especially that last incident where your mom lost her life, for you guys to get out of that situation. There are a lot of places that you can point the blame, but not at the three of you all. And your mom. Even with your mom, peace be upon her, eternal soul forevermore, she was abused too. And because of the issues that she was dealing with, we can't get her, it would be great to have her here to be able to share what she was going through. But we can't do that. So having this conversation with you all, it just means the world to me, because this is going to help so many people, including other first responders, including other mandated reporters, because as Albert and I are going to be working together more, and having these presentations and talking to other first responders and saying, hey, you don't want this to be on you. You don't want this to be something that you could have prevented, but because of whatever, you dropped the ball. You don't want this to be the reason that you lose your license. Let's start there, because it's all about the money at the end of the day.
I want Claire to be able to jump in, but I want to say something. So, as an adult and as a practitioner, I don't per se blame practitioners directly. There are mistakes made, but I've seen internally that it's more systemic: lack of resources, lack of training, we have a friend in common that got 2 infant fatalities in the same week, and she takes care of special needs kids for her own family, right?
Yeah.
And I know how difficult that is. But something I want to bring the conversation back to is with our mom and how she impacted it. When I shared my hammer story with Claire, I'm not sure if you're comfortable sharing this, but she confided in me in something that I wasn't even aware of, where it wasn't just me and my siblings that were doing things we didn't want to do for self-preservation. Are you comfortable talking about that?
Oh, yeah. And our mother as well. And I was just going to interject previously when you were speaking, LP, that this stuff is generational too. That these things have been happening for a long, long, long time. Both of our parents came from abusive homes. So, what you're referring to was mom presenting me to Doug as kind of a peace offering. There was something on the table. I forget exactly what the situation was, but in order for her, to protect herself, or it could have been even a family type situation. I was, put makeup on, hair done, and I was given to him sexually, to appease him. Something had gone wrong. I don't know. It could have been anything. I don't remember exactly the situation, but I remember being presented to him in that way. And of course, it was a situation to where I just tried to put myself into another zone, another place, and deal with it. Because rather it be me than all the other consequences that we were all going through. And then for me, the thing that helped me get over it was just the fact that I wasn't the only one who dealt with that situation. Later in life, I heard, I stayed in a group home for my last year and a half of high school. So I got to hear numerous stories of what young women had gone through. And then also seeing it later in movies and things. So I wouldn't be surprised if our mother herself had been in a situation similar to that. So yeah, that's why I'm really glad that we're doing this, because we're not the only ones who've been in a situation like this. Getting the word out there, putting it more in the forefront, it's something very, very important.
I still don't see my mom as the aggressor, but it wasn't until we had that conversation that I learned that my mom presented my sister to my father for sexual favor. But some of the worst beatings I actually got were from my mom as well. So it's all of us that are being victimized at the hands of the abuser or the narcissist that at some point may end up doing something we really don't want to do for survival, and then trying to process or carry or deal with that guilt as we get older. Ashley, I'm curious to see what your perspective is.
So to piggyback on first what LP said a few minutes ago about the we loved our parents, I actually hated my dad growing up, and I told them that just because by the time he didn't do anything that was fatherly. Anytime I'd homework or school stuff or anything I was excited about, he really couldn't care when he was gone. To what Claire said, to piggyback off what LP said a few minutes ago, at a very young age, I did not like our father. I felt like he didn't do anything that was supportive to any of us. Anytime we would reach out and be excited about something, it was kind of just brush about anything. So maybe from age 9 onward. And then possibly having abuse in her background. And from what one of our older cousins said, her childhood was horrible as well. She was molested, as siblings were all passed away from AIDS over 2 decades ago at least. The other one nobody has seen since 1992. None of his family has seen him since. So that's been their situation. And also mental health in our family has been generational, way back, to the point where I think our great grandfather was either staff at a facility or a patient at a facility. So and then it trickles down all the way to our generation. And the same thing applies on our father's side of the family. When I spoke to our father, he said that at the same time our mom was going in and out of mental institutions, so was his mom.
And I didn't even know that until an adult.
And him with his PTSD, it's just a recipe for disaster. I'm not giving any excuses for anything he did, but just researching the type of sex offender he was, it was situational. He wasn't going to go out and look for any kid on the street. It was going to happen right there in his house. Yeah. That's the only place he felt confident enough to commit that type of damage based off the situation.
A lot of times when we talk about crime, and as you know, Albert, crime is a lot of times based on proximity to the person or the people that you're going to victimize. Some people will choose their victims based on a number of things. He wouldn't go out on the street and just find somebody and do the same thing. Times because there is this shame or this fear of being found out, a lot of times you're more protected in your home. You're supposed to be protected in your home. It's almost like a double-edged sword. Like your home is your safety zone, but your home can also be the worst place that you experience traumas, because those entities or those places that you live are considered sacred. So people don't want to violate that sacred space or what have you. Even first responders. I've seen other EMS and other first responders have that kind of hands-off approach or whatever. It's like, oh, this is a little bit bigger than me. And it's like, no, it's really not. It's something that you absolutely need to get involved in, because you don't know everything that's going on. And you may be getting a report from a kid that's saying, oh, my daddy told me to hit my sister in the head or whatever. Sometimes we look at kids and say, well, kids have these vivid imaginations and different things like that. They may even have things that they talk about that are not true. Like, I got an invisible friend, or I got somebody that is doing something to me, and they find out that didn't happen. It might be just something that they're experiencing psychologically or whatever. Where as a first responder, we're not equipped for all of that. We're not trained on all of these things. So a lot of times, to err on the side of caution, we will see some of these mandated reporters say, well, I don't see anything hardcore concrete here, so it's just going to be listed as an as an incident. We came out, we did our little whatever we had to do, and we got it marked on the books. If another call comes in, another hotline call comes in about maybe the same thing, maybe we'll put more resources into it, like you were talking about, Albert. It's hard because the way the system is set up.
That's why when I do a training, one of the things I talk about is we may only get a glimpse, just a glimpse, insight. And it may not just be law enforcement or child protective services. It could be you, EMS, fire department. It may be the teacher. Yes, teachers are not in my domestic violence training, but they were the most responsible for the abuse I incurred because they made those concerned phone calls home without providing treatment or services. So all that happened is he learned what to hide, and he changed how the abuse is done. So training is everything. And being able to communicate with one another, because it takes more than just a village. When we're on the podcast yesterday with Tiffany, because you may catch something that seems that's bizarre or strange. That literally is the words used in the documentation. But if you looked at all the pieces together, oh my God, the picture was there. And I'm not talking about one of those 1,000-piece puzzle pieces. I'm talking about 4 pieces. Really would have been easy to put it together, and it wasn't. It wasn't. And I'm really passionate about this, right? Because this is the type of stuff that prevents this from going on. It's still happening today. And so I think that's why it's so important. Sorry, got a little.
No, this is exactly the point. We have to have this advocacy to raise awareness with all of those individuals, the teachers, the counselors, the first responders, everybody that gets either a phone call or they have contact with those people who are surviving these traumas, these adverse childhood experiences. We all play a part. It's that village, like you were talking about on Tiffany's show. Who's your village? Yeah, it takes a village to raise a child, but who's in the village?
That's been abused or neglected. Because to me, I think that's a higher standard, because there's so much repair work that needs to go in addition to what it normally takes to raise a child. And so when you're talking about mandatory reporters, it really should have been everyone. Because in our apartment complex, they were literally putting up posters that said, Doug has unprotected sex with his daughter. Someone called Child Protective Services. They knew enough to put up the posters, but they're not making the phone calls. It takes more than a village. It takes all of us to come together, because otherwise we don't know what is the correct thing to do.
It's like nowadays, everybody will pull out their phone to record a situation, put it up on social media, but no one is calling the authorities.
Nobody's calling the authorities.
They want hits. They want.
See, that's why I got my sweatshirt on. It says lives over likes. Now, this is a sweatshirt that I got from a guy who has a nonprofit, and we do these Stop the Bleed trainings in the Atlanta area. And he came up with this hashtag. It's actually a hashtag, Lives Over Likes, because we see this stuff all the time. It could be an accident. It could be some, emergency situation. You got 50 people there. Everybody has their phone out and recording or they're live streaming, and nobody's calling 911. And it's like, well, why is it's been 15, 20 minutes. Why is EMS not on the scene? Because everybody thought that at least somebody called 911. Now everybody's recording, and everybody forgot to call 911. And like I tell people, you can record all day and twice on Sunday. Why don't you hit 911 first?
Yeah.
It's actually
you know what I'm saying? Call 911 first. If you're gonna record, you're gonna record. Like my issue is not the people recording. My issue is you're not calling 911 first.
Hey, but I do want to kind of keep these, because of some of the stuff we're talking about is kind of heavy. I want to try and keep them condensed for a short episode, but I do want to give Ashley another opportunity because I know there's been some technical difficulties. So if there's anything else about our conversation that you want to share, I really want to make sure that we're getting your perspective too. I talked about a lot. I talked about the fact that I did things to Claire, and you and Claire had an interaction where she was a little resentful because you stopped her from committing homicide, which in retrospect kept her out of prison, but because it wasn't the quote unquote correct thing to do. And then the fact that I didn't even know Mom had presented Claire to our father to have sex and that type of stuff. But just whatever your perspective is, and I know you did not like Doug for the things that he did, and you talked about our mom having a background in sexual abuse. She was sexually abused and everything, and that's the whole mental health tragedy where instead of getting treatment, they labeled her as depressed, and then she got with someone that was physically aggressive, domestic violence. And so then every time she reached out for help, she was seen as delusional. So depression became paranoid schizophrenia, and you quite literally weaponized her mental health up to and including her death. So where the district attorney declined to press charges because they thought it was a tragic accident because she was mentally disabled the entire time, missing that she has been victimized her entire life, and the system did nothing except punish her by putting her in a mental institution time and time again. So I really wonder if she had anything wrong with her whatsoever. Do you think what could have happened with Claire if they didn't identify what was going on? Claire could have been in the same boat where they continued to drug and institutionalize her because she tried to kill someone and kill herself, not realizing that there's a whole heck of a lot going on here. So talking about mental health and actually what it means, I think is really important. And I don't want you to, this is a burning question I had, and you do not have to answer it, but as you probably know, Claire obviously is a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of him, and I was too. After the death of there's stuff that happened before Mom was killed, but then there's the worst of it from my eyes was after the death of Mom, and I don't know. I've never known if you were a victim of that as well. You don't have to answer that. I know that's a whole lot to put out there. If you want to answer at a later time or just pass over, it's fine. So I really want to pass the mic to you to just run up anything else that you want to talk about or reiterate anything you said. That
a couple of things. So I know we think of Dad Doug, but also, when I remember Mom, I know that wasn't the first time. There was a time I walked up to a church member and I looked at her neck and I was thinking, oh, so somebody tried to slit her throat too. And it turned out she just had some sort of a thyroid surgery going on. So, she obviously, Claire's biological father was no walk in the park either for trying to do that. So she was going to be, no, I was never sexually assaulted, but, to the best of my knowledge, because honestly, everything was blurry. Because even throughout high school, I had a lot of blackouts. There's stuff my foster siblings could tell me. I don't remember anything. I don't remember it. But yeah, so I don't think so. I know they tried to assess me at my first foster home. They didn't tell me why I was going to the doctor. We got there and I'm like, oh no, that's not happening. So I just took off running throughout the facility. My foster mom wasn't too thrilled. But yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at with that. Just and I have reported so many different situations and it gets ignored. And I'm not talking about just sexual abuse or whatnot. I've reported a 95-year-old sitting in his own pee and urine, his own feces for at least a good week and a half, 2 weeks with his granddaughter in the other room saying, oh, I don't touch him. No, he just stays there. And I reported that. And nothing happened about it. I saw an elderly lady bleeding on the sidewalk in her hospital gown, and the facility staff members took one look at her and went back into the building. So we brought out the paramedics because the facility couldn't care less. And it was 30, maybe 34, 35 degrees outside. And she wasn't even alert. She wasn't even alert oriented. She didn't really know where she was at. She didn't know where she was going. And they left her on the sidewalk in the freezing cold. So there's on all type of levels. It's not always about picking up the phone call. It's about somebody answering it on the other end. So
having the resources and having the resources to respond. I'll let you go back in a second, but I know here in the state of Missouri, it is so bad, and I don't know if it's gotten better, but there was a time where it didn't matter how many times you hotlined, there was no one to respond. And so, like, for instance, one of those infant fatalities I referenced, we didn't go out to the third call, and it probably wouldn't have been a fatality if we'd gotten out there sooner. But then also the delay in response prevents evidence from being visible for the authorities to be able to take action, because evidence is perishable. And so if we don't have resources to respond, people get tipped off that CPS is coming, right? The teacher sees something, they call us, they think it's funny. So then when they get to later in the day, then they go ahead and make the hotline call. 3 days later, someone comes out. Well, that's 72 hours to go ahead and get things fixed up and cleaned up. And like, in our home, paint the walls and fix all the damage and put the Christmas tree back up. And so, so it goes back to resources and stuff. But no, continue what you're saying. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I really want to echo that point. But it's not just about calling 911. It's about someone picking up and then having the resources to respond in a timely manner and be trained to do the right thing.
Yeah. What you're saying about training, I think that is huge. You got so many people also that have really good intentions. Like I had a social worker come to my house one time and straight interrogate me for a couple of hours about why I was a foster parent, because she thought I was just doing it for money. She didn't know my background. She didn't know anything. And I had to report her. But also how these people talk to some of these professionals, they totally blindside them. If they're charismatic, I had one little boy, cutest little thing. He was about 12, and his dad was wealthy. He had a really good job. He knew how to talk to people. So when me and the child kept reporting this father, nobody believed either one of us. They sent that boy back home. His dad was seriously beating him to the point where he just ran away. When he was 11, he ran away. By the time he was 12, he was back home. By the time he was 13, he was back in foster care again. And because every time they'd have visits, the man would take him to Disneyland because he had a lot of money and he was a handsome guy. And so he really knew how to talk to all these social workers, and they didn't believe any accusations. So there has to be a special type of person. Not only are they trained, but they have to understand their training to the level of where they kind of have this innate ability to tell the truth from the lies. So that's something really lacking too. A lot of people have good intentions.
There was this time that I was interviewed. This is after the death of my mom, so it was probably a month or two before I came into care. And there was allegations, and they came to the school. And it was at a point where we were requesting to talk to the social worker away from our parents. We as youth are saying, can we not do it in earshot of father, right? And it was for physical abuse. And she asked me, like, what my whole life was like in punishments. And I said, oh, it's not really that bad. I mean, punishments are pretty much consistent with me being chocolate. And so she wrote that down and said I was charismatic and put my statement. And so she didn't do a physical check based on my statement. She's like, oh, that's good. Now, we know homicide, incest, all this stuff going on. I've got scars and a dent in my skull. I've got all this type of stuff going on, whatever. But exactly, it's to your point. If you know how to speak in a right way, and as a child or a victim, you learn how to sell the lies. Because when they leave, if you haven't, it's going to get much worse. So yeah, it comes to increased awareness and teaching them to become a special type of person, to be able to tell the difference between the truth and the lie, and going beyond best intentions. Because I'm sure you can relate, Ashley. There are some of these social workers that are ready to remove a child from a family because they found out the mom smoked a blunt. But then you have someone that's like sexually abusing their kids and everyone in their family, and everyone looks nice and neat and pretty, and they're kept there. So yeah, it comes back to training and increased awareness and having these conversations.
I had to come to a psychological decision, a consciousness to know that we cannot survive in the environment that we were in, because otherwise I could have easily just smooth things over and say, like, oh, everything is fine. It wasn't going to work that. Like, it was time to tell the truth at a moment, because I feel like, if either of us had continued to say, at a point to where I saw it as protecting him. We had to come to the understanding he didn't deserve to be protected. If we had continued, who knows what would have happened.
I want to thank you all for just, again, having the courage and the candor, as well as the compassion for yourselves and each other. I was talking to Mrs. LP the other day about grace, and I said, I've changed part of my view on what grace means. I think for a long time, I thought grace was you giving somebody grace because of whatever the circumstances is that you find yourself in. Maybe they did something traumatic to you, and that was part of either your forgiveness, or it was a way to look at that person and say, I'm not going to do all the things that I could do to punish you. Then I thought about it and I was like, well, that can be true. But the other thing that can also be true is you can look at it from a narcissistic point of view. Somebody grace is a control thing. If I say, hey, you know what, I'm going to make sure that the punishment that I give you, I got the power to inflict whatever damage that I want. I'm going to give you grace. So maybe today, I just don't let you participate in this sport. Maybe tomorrow is me touching. Maybe the next day is me telling you to take this weapon and do something to one of you know what I mean? I'm giving you grace because I could just every day do whatever you think is the most horrible thing to you. But because day is not that day, I get to decide the punishment. So some people look at grace like these narcissists, look at it from a control perspective. I got the power to make your life a living hell or not. I got the power to command you to do whatever. That's the ultimate high. When you can control somebody, when you got your finger on the pulse, it's one thing to have your finger on the button, but to be able to push the button, that's a whole nother conversation. So I think when we have these conversations, I want you guys to give yourself your own grace to know that, you know what, this was not a situation that I asked to be in. This is not a situation. I didn't wake up today and yesterday and say, hey, I can't wait to be abused. I've done a series talking about generational and ancestral trauma. The lady that I interviewed, her name is Simone Nofel. She's an applied epigeneticists. The first episode, we talked everything about her situation dealing with her ancestral and generational trauma. This current episode, we did a tutorial on ancestral and generational trauma and explaining how it works and giving some more of the academic and technical terms of it. But we always talk about resources and we always talk about resolutions. How do you heal from this stuff? Because it's not about just trauma dumping. What do we do to get past these things? I believe the healing process, in part, is having this podcast. Having the three of you be willing to have this open, blunt, honest conversation, it means the world because people are going to listen to that and say, you know, maybe that happened in my house, but I wasn't ready to talk about it. I didn't have the courage to talk about it. I didn't know I had options. Oh, I really could have called 911. Oh, I really could have called the hotline. Or I really could have talked to more than just a teacher. I could have talked to all of these different individuals that you guys are naming. There are so many things that are teachable moments that we're having that are coming out during each of these episodes. It means the world to so many people that haven't even heard it yet. Like we haven't even put it out yet. Whether it's you, Claire, or you, Ashley, or you, Albert, whatever you're sharing, everybody's going to have a different point of view. And that's okay. There may be things like you said, Albert, hey, I don't remember it happening like that, but I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to take that away from you because that's your truth. That's your facts. At the end of the day, whatever you view or whatever you remember still ended up with the same results. So having those different points of view, I can look at it and say, well, damn, you know, you said that you don't like plastic and you don't like Tweety birds. Well, there's a huge reason that you don't like those things. And if that's from what you remember, that's important because you're probably not going to ever like those things again. The fact that you were talking about having hesitation on some of the things that you were willing to share because it kind of makes you self-conscious on some things or maybe how people perceive you in your role being the guy, being the big brother, being the man, even though you were a boy at the time. That speaks volumes because we know from as men that emotional suppression that we're taught keeps us from even opening our damn mouths on all kinds of stuff. You don't even have to necessarily be abused per se, sexually or physically, but that emotional suppression, I told you, my uncle and my cousins and other older males, hey, you don't cry other than you got a bone sticking out, you fell off a building, you got crushed between some cars, somebody's dead or is dying, or you won or lost a major sporting event. Anything else, you punk, you weak, suck it up. You throw trauma into that. You throw these adverse childhood experiences that you all have experienced. And somebody is expecting you not to shed a tear. Somebody is expecting you to keep your damn mouth closed. Somebody is expecting you to smile like some theater stuff. How do you do that? You're a living, breathing human being. You're not a cyborg. You're not a one-cell amoeba. You are a living, breathing human being with thoughts, with feelings, with emotions. And even if it was just you and you didn't have any siblings, different folks, same strokes. It doesn't matter. What matters is the wrong. And also how you are going about, and when I say you, I'm talking about all three of you all, the healing process. It's not a one-stop shop in terms of one thing is going to fix this. It's not going to change the history. It's not going to stop you all from having these thoughts that go through your head. You all have children. What are you doing to stop this generational and ancestral trauma? This podcast right here is part of that process. You're like, hey, we're not going to continue this cycle again. I couldn't even imagine how difficult it must be for you all every single damn day to have these things still come up, to even have these conversations in your own head, let alone talking to each other, because you all are almost like walking on eggshells around each other sometimes when you're having these conversations. It's like, you know, are you okay with me saying this? Or are you ready to talk about that? Do you think that's okay for me to broach the subject? And when I see that, it almost makes me cry, because you should be able to talk to each other, because you all went through this under the same roof, in between the same four walls. Now, there were some differences in terms of what trauma was inflicted on you by Doug. However, it's all relative in terms of you all are family. I commend you for having that confidence and that courage under fire. We know about that stuff. Having that courage on fire to either run into a burning building, to go where the danger is, to neutralize it, to go into these situations where it's a domestic violence situation, whether it's an intimate partner thing or even a family situation. Those are the biggest dangers that we as first responders face. Whether you're EMS, police, fire, or even as a mandated reporter for the state, those state workers get attacked too. You don't see it a lot on the news. That's a hostile situation. And that's why a lot of times they want law enforcement to be there, because you don't know how that's going to work out. And people will do all kind of stuff to shield themselves from the public knowing what's true. Having these dialogues and these conversations and coming up with, how do we move from this to that? How do we go from trauma to being triumphant? How do we go from being told to suck it up to being a survivor? I just love the fact that you all are willing to do this. So I think
This is kind of heavy, so let's talk about that. Next episode is
trauma to triumph.
You guys know that?
Yeah.
Ashley, last chance just to like make sure you got your voice heard. So I'm gonna go back to like I was, and then if you, anything else you want to say to make sure we got your voice. I want it to be equal first. Ashley has the last word.
Well, I know we brought up a lot of things that we didn't realize, some moments and times that I don't even remember. Even you mentioned how she was carried out. I don't remember anything about that. It'd be beneficial down the road to understand that a little bit better. I think that it opened a lot of doors for communication and a lot of topics that do need to be addressed, not just for us, but because, you know, this is one thing I don't like to do when I tell people, and I've been telling people since, I don't know, I probably started saying it in elementary school and I haven't really stopped. Like, there was one boy, he was just making mama jokes because that was fun to do when we were in elementary school. And I just turned and I looked at him, I'm like, my mom's dead. And he started laughing even harder. But, you know, back then, you know, kids are mean. But recently I spoke to one of my classmates that I've been having a lot of issues with, and he tried to do this whole comparison thing. I don't like to compare our trauma to anybody else's. Even the three of us have different trauma. I don't like to play the checklist game where, well, at least this didn't happen to you, or that didn't happen to you, and I don't like when people do that, because the 85 kids that I've had, they all had different situations happen to them. No two situations were identical, but it affected all of them. From the newborn that, you know, had fetal alcohol syndrome, my 17-year-old who had 8 abortions from her biological father. They were all affected, whether they knew it or not, because you look at an infant, and when they don't get the proper compassionate care of their parent, they're already beginning to be damaged. So, you know, that's one thing that I want to consider and be mindful of moving forward, is that, yeah, we had it hard. We had things difficult, but that doesn't negate anybody else's circumstance that they have experienced. And even to the point where, you know, maybe it wasn't sexual. It doesn't make any other abuse less profound to that individual. Anything can be damaging. It could have been neglect. I had one, he had autism, but until I brought it to their attention, he wasn't diagnosed. And he only knew, he was 4 turning 5, about to start kindergarten. And the only words he could say were just direct quotations from SpongeBob, because that's all he watched since he was born. And he only knew peanut butter and hiding in a closet to go eat it, because his mom was too busy shooting up. So, you know, everybody's got their own. So that's my takeaway, even from hearing your guys' testimonies today, your versions. Everybody has their own.
And we'll just leave it at that. I want to thank everybody for joining us on this episode. At the end of every Trigger Warning Talk podcast, we cover a missing person case. And if you're looking at our logo under our true crime banner over my right shoulder, you'll see that. We are going to be talking about a case of a missing Missouri teen girl who never made it home from school. Now, this story comes from Mrs. LP, who found it on Reddit. When I clicked on the Reddit link, and if you're watching this podcast, you'll see on the screen the 3 sources that I'm going to be pulling this story from. The first source is Reddit. The second source is crimeonline.com. And the the third source is a news site called KMBC.com. Now, KMBC is a news station in Kansas City, Missouri, my home state. There's a logo out for her, which means be on the lookout. So I'm going to play the news story from KMBC.com. Take a listen.
A mother in Independence is extremely concerned. Her daughter disappeared 1 week ago. She says the 15-year-old was last seen at Van Horn High School. KMBC 9's Brian Johnson is live in Independence with the latest clues and the work detectives are doing to bring her home safely.
Yeah, Bray, this is a tough case for officers. When adults go missing, police can trace their cell phone, their car, their bank accounts. There's all kinds of information. In this case with this teen, they have none of those things, and the mother is worried sick. Take a good look at this face. Quinaya Warren has been missing since last Wednesday.
This is the scariest thing ever for our family.
Marcellus Bradford says her daughter has never left home before.
This is not her. She's one of the good kids. And everybody's shocked. Like the whole family's shocked.
Last week, Quinaya made it to school at Van Horn High, but she never made it home. Loved ones fear the worst.
The day that she went missing, one of my ex-coworkers' bodies was found. So, yeah.
Police are doing what they can to track down the teen.
This is the police department.
The detective working the case called Bradford twice while we visited.
Anytime a parent of a child and that your child's missing, it's going to cause concern, definitely. And that's why we investigate every one of these missing persons cases.
The teen doesn't have a working phone. No one really knows where she is.
This is the same way we lost my sister from running the streets. It's the same way she got killed.
They buried that relative 3 years ago. The family just wants Quinaya back safe. In Independence, Brian Johnson, KMBC 9 News.
Bradford has different theories on why her daughter may have left. Friends say she could be in Kansas City or Memphis, Tennessee. If you know anything, please call Independence Police.
If you have any information about the whereabouts, please contact the Independence Police Department in Missouri. They are a suburban police department east of Kansas City, Missouri. I have on the screen, and I'll post their information also. Their website and their phone number is 816-325-7300. Again, their number is 816-325-7300. Any information that you can provide to them to help this family with some type of closure. In closing, I would say that it's not a matter of if, but when and where an emergency is going to happen. And that emergency is whatever you deem it to be. It doesn't have to be a car wreck. It doesn't have to be a fire. It doesn't have to be a heart attack. Whatever your emergency is, it's important. That's why when you call 911, we show up. And so if you need any help, if you need any resources, you will see those resources listed in the show notes for this and every episode that we do on the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, as well as we have contact information for the guests that appear on this show. Live in awareness, never live in fear. Take a CPR, AD, first aid class. Do a stop the bleed training. Also, keep your head on swivel because you can be the immediate responder until a first responder shows up. And the actions that you take could save the life of yourself, someone that's next to you, whether it's an intimate partner, stranger, family member, or whomever. For the Trigger Warning Talk podcast, LP out.